Hi, everyone. I'm Tyler Fulton. I farm with my family in western Manitoba, actually. We're a 650 cow calf operation, and we have a modest amount of um, crop land as well. Um, so I would just want to talk a little bit about continuous improvement on our farm, and maybe identifying some of the factors that lead to success and failure of implementing new practices. I talk about continuous improvement really in the same way that I would about adopting beneficial or better management practices. So I'll just keep flip flopping back and forth there. Next slide, please. Uh, there we go. So I think in general, we've kind of identified about four different categories of factors that have, that play into whether or not we succeed or fail on a particular practice. One of those is management time. The next is technology and innovation. Social norms and values. You can't ignore it. It's a real thing, even when adopting new practices. And then lastly, benefit cost trade offs. Next slide, please. So first off, on the management time aspect, it's pretty critical to just acknowledge the fact that farmers are always really busy. There's jobs that need to get done, and there's jobs that should get done, and quite simply, during the busy season, it's really difficult to adopt new practices without really thinking through, the system the system or the new practices and the implications that has during that busy season. So an example of that is our kind of preparation for calving season a few years ago, where we adopted a Google Sheet and a Google Form to help us capture data at calving quickly and efficiently. And it really did improve our system from like a pencil and paper based system over to one that provided real time access to the data and to the records that could help with operations during calving. Also, limits the number of errors, and generally just improve the whole calving process. And allowed us to focus on really the core issue at hand in calving season, and that's animal health. Next slide, please. Technology and innovation, I think, is a really critical factor that can lead to good adoption, especially if you're dealing with a larger farm team. Because it can be, engaging in ways that, that otherwise, wouldn't help implement those practices. So, if a tool is fun or cool or is really interesting to a farmer or to all of the farm team, it can really help motivate and drive those new practices. An example of this is a pasture map app that we started using several years ago now. That make it. The goal initially was for us to be able to more accurately monitor the rest and grazing period intervals of our summer pasture paddocks. And then also in the context of, well, if I go away, who else is managing it? And when it's an app on your phone that you can use at any time, and it's simple and engaging, you can almost, ask, figure out different solutions to different problems. Using it really does drive adoption. Another example that that kind of leads to an insight, I think, that we had on our place was we tried growing a new corn variety called Enogen corn, and the claim to fame here is that it has a higher alpha amylase component, which leads to better digestion in a cow's rumen. And so I wanted to test it. I wanted to do an on-farm trial that could, that could compare one or the other. And so when I started thinking about it, it really occurred to me that there were other practices that that I had to think about in order to eliminate the variables within this farm trial. But what enabled it was really some investment in RFID, like in an individual animal electronic IDs, and the Bluetooth enabled scale head and and wand reading device that made it super simple to be able to have individual weight gains on this feeding trial. So it's something that can, when you start down a pathway, especially when it involves technology, you just really never know what it's actually gonna overturn. Next slide, please. So I mentioned social norms and ethics, and there's kind of two separate kind of angles here. One has to consider whether or not the practice that you're doing on the farm is public. From a grain farming standpoint, it's pretty obvious, I think, to all the neighbors and the people in the area when they're driving by your field, what you're doing on that field. And so that actually there's a dynamic there that that creates some social pressure that can have a pretty major impact on the degree to which a new practice is maintained over time. A really interesting example to me is one that relates to the ethics, on a cattle operation, and that is pain mitigation in cattle. So broadly, ranches have started really over the course of the last 10 years, and are really ramping up the use of a pain mitigation product called meloxicam. And it's generally used around when you're castrating or dehorning a young animal, to help make it feel better. Apparently, the research suggests that there's not a great deal of support from an economic standpoint to do it, and yet it's actually seen huge growth in its use. And so the point here is that if the practice very much aligns with an ethic that you have as a farmer, and really that all livestock producers in this example have, to really take great care of their animals and ensure their welfare, then it really does make a difference. On the last, I guess, this category, I think an example of a failure on our farm is really our inability to recycle ag plastics. It's not super obvious to anybody outside of our farm that we're not recycling the twine and plastic. And I just have this tendency to it's inconvenient. It's a really bulky product that ideally is clean and stuff, and it's difficult to manage it. And for me, anyways, I don't have a collection site that's super close, and so I haven't really felt the social pressure to to really institute a farm level recycling program for these products, and continue to burn. And I think in the long run, I need to move that direction, but I remain a little skeptical about the use of that product in the future and the general, the broad benefits that it would bring to society. Next slide, please. Everything is kind of a benefit cost trade-off, but I think it's, I guess the point here is really an economic one. Quite simply, if you are really dealing with tight margins, and cattle producers over the course of the last 10 years have had some really tight margins, then it's harder to rationalize an investment into, that's only going to pay off in the long run. But one example from a positive standpoint is our change to adopting a fall pregnancy checking. We used to go and sort the animals to ones that we thought were higher risk and those that were not, and we wouldn't go and preg check the animals that were not, that we didn't deem as high risk. But when feed costs went through the roof during the droughts, and the values of these cattle really took off over the course of the last couple of years, the economics changed, and so you have to be willing to kind of reconsider that, and then go forward. Last example, which again I would identify as a failure it was a failure that we've since rectified, is, for the longest time we didn't have a great crop rotation. We would grow corn, 2 years in a row because it was convenient and it was close to the farm and it was more logistically efficient. But we didn't really identify really the broader risk, pest management components of it that was going to, drop our yields and be a factor in the longer term. When we started actually investigating and trying to quantify what those impacts were, when we started to see, for example, a corn borer show up, then we changed. And in hindsight now, I wish we'd done it earlier. So next slide, please. To finish off, broadly, I think it's important for everybody to consider all of these factors and maybe develop a score that that takes a comprehensive view, that would help us assess whether or not a new practice would be successful on your farm. And then that it allows you to kind of make a priority list of the things that we should be spending time on versus the things that are maybe a little less high likelihood of being maintained for the long run.